The first time Josie Calloway grabbed my tie and pulled me 3 inches closer to her face, it wasn't romantic. It was tactical. "Kiss me on the cheek in exactly 4 seconds," she whispered, eyes fixed over my shoulder, "and try to look like a man who's been in love with me since college." "We didn't go to college together," I said. "They don't know that." Her fingers tightened on the silk. "For seconds, Grant. I did the math wrong the first time and kissed her a full second early, which meant I caught the corner of her mouth instead of her cheek, which meant her entire extended family gathered around a buffet table loaded with deviled eggs and a suspicious amount of ambrosia salad, let out a collective, delighted gasp like we'd just announced a pregnancy instead of an engagement that had existed for exactly 11 minutes. That's where this story starts. Not with the gasp. With the 11 minutes before it, when Josie Calloway, my downstairs neighbor, professional caterer, and a woman I had spoken to maybe 40 times in 18 months, turned to me in a parking lot outside her cousin's engagement party and asked me to marry her. Not for real. Never for real. That's what she said, standing there in a green dress with her arms crossed like she was negotiating a lease renewal instead of asking a near stranger to commit fraud against an entire extended family. My name is Grant Whitlow. I was 28, a structural engineer who spent most of his week making sure buildings didn't fall down, which some days felt like the only stable thing in my life. I lived in apartment 4B of a converted Victorian that had been chopped into 6 units, and Josie lived in 2A, directly below me, which meant I had spent 1.5 years learning her schedule through sound alone. 6 a.m., the espresso machine. 7:15, the door. 11 p.m. on weeknights, something acoustic and a little sad played low enough that I only caught the edges of it through the floorboards. We were not friends, exactly. We were the kind of neighbors who traded packages left at the wrong door and commented on each other's grocery hauls in the hallway. She once told me my meal prep chicken looked like punishment. I told her the smell of whatever she was catering that week made my apartment smell like a wedding I hadn't been invited to, which, it turned out, was an accurate metaphor for everything that was about to happen to me. The night it started, I was hauling a case of sparkling water up the stairs for a barbecue I wasn't attending, and Josie was sitting on the bottom step with her phone in her lap and her forehead against her knees, which is not a position people take when things are going well. "You okay?" I asked, because it seemed like the responsible thing to ask a woman who looked like she was bracing for impact on her own staircase. She looked up. Her mascara had given up on the day. Define okay. Vertical. Breathing. Not actively crying. Then no. She held up her phone, screen facing me, though I was too far away to read it. My aunt just texted the family group chat asking if I'm bringing someone to Meredith's engagement party this weekend. Someone. In quotes. Like I'm an event category. Are you? Am I bringing someone? Or am I an event category? Either. She laughed, but it came out thin. I broke up with Trent 4 months ago. He's going to be there. He's Meredith's fiancé's best friend, which means I get to watch him toast the happiest couple in Ohio while my grandmother asks me, in front of God and the deviled eggs, why I let a good man get away. I set the water down on the step below her. That sounds like a lot to survive on a Saturday. It's not just Saturday. She rubbed her palms over her face. It's every family event for the rest of my natural life until I either die alone or show up with a ring on my finger. My mother has started sending me listings for venues. Venues, Grant. For a wedding that does not exist, to a person who does not exist, because apparently being 26 and single is a family emergency. I should have said something comforting and generic and gone upstairs to my sparkling water and my evening. That would have been the sane version of this story. Instead, I sat down on the step beside her, because something about the particular exhaustion in her voice made me want to fix it, which should have told me everything I needed to know about how this was going to end. "What if you brought someone?" I said. "I told you. There's no one. There's a version of someone." She turned her head slowly, the way people do when a plan starts assembling itself somewhere behind their eyes. "Keep talking. I'm just saying. You don't need a real relationship to survive one weekend. You need a guy who can hold a plate of deviled eggs and say nice things about your work ethic. You're describing a golden retriever. I'm describing a favor between neighbors. Josie studied me for a long moment, the kind of look that made me feel like she was pricing something at an estate sale. You do that? Pretend to date me for a party? I didn't say date. Grant. Her mouth curved, slow and dangerous. My family doesn't do casual. If I bring a guy to Meredith's engagement party, by dessert they will have you assigned a wedding date and a china pattern. There is no version of this where you're just my plus one. I should have stood up right then. I should have picked up my sparkling water and gone upstairs and let Josie Calloway solve her own family the way adults are supposed to. Instead, I said, then what's the version where I am something more? She blinked. Whatever she'd expected me to say, it wasn't that. Fiancé, she said slowly, testing the word like it might bite her. You'd have to be my fiancé. Fake. Obviously fake. We tell no one it's fake. We get through the weekend. We quietly break it off in a month or two when things cool down, and everyone forgets it happened. That's a big ask from a guy whose chicken looks like punishment. I'll cater your birthday for the next 3 years. I don't have a birthday. Everyone has a birthday. Not one I tell people about. She was laughing now, really laughing, and the sound did something unreasonable to my chest. Fine. I'll owe you. Whatever you want. Within reason, no felonies. I held out my hand like we were closing on a house. Deal. She shook it. Her palm was warm and a little unsteady, and neither of us let go for about 2 seconds longer than a handshake requires. This is insane, she said. Completely. We need rules. Rules, I agreed, and a ring. Her face went pale. A ring. You can't propose an engagement without a prop, Josie. That's just an announcement. She groaned and put her head back against the step above her. I hate that you're right. That's how, 4 days later, I found myself standing in a thrift store on 5th Street with Josie Calloway, holding a tray of costume jewelry, while she debated the emotional believability of a cubic zirconia the size of a lima bean. Too big, she said. It looks like a hostage negotiation. Too small looks like I don't respect you. There is no version of a fake ring that says the correct amount of respect, Grant. We settled on a thin gold band with a modest oval stone, $14, which Josie insisted on paying for herself because, she said, I'm not letting you fund your half of a crime. I told her that made her the mastermind and me the accomplice, and she said that was, historically, an accurate division of labor between us, since I was the one who kept quietly leaving my newspaper outside her door because she'd once mentioned she liked the crossword and couldn't afford a subscription. I hadn't realized she'd noticed that. It unsettled me more than the ring did. Wait, I said, as we walked out onto 5th Street with the little velvet box rattling in my jacket pocket. You clock the crossword thing. I clock everything, Grant. It's a professional hazard. You cater enough parties, you learn to read a room before it knows what it wants. She bumped her shoulder against mine, easy, like we'd done this 100 times. You've been doing it for 4 months. I thought it was an accident the first 2 weeks. By month 2, I started leaving my door unlocked on Tuesdays so you wouldn't have to bend down. That is either the most thoughtful thing anyone's done for me or a serious security risk. Both things can be true. She stopped at the corner, waiting for the light, and looked over at me with an expression I couldn't quite place yet, something between amusement and appraisal. You're going to have to actually learn things about me, you know? If this is going to hold up under interrogation. My mother will ask what I order at restaurants. My grandmother will ask my middle name. My cousin Ashley will absolutely ask how you proposed, in detail, because she's writing a novel and she steals material. Then teach me. Now, coffee's right there. I nodded toward the shop on the corner, its windows fogged from the espresso machine inside. We've got a fake engagement to build. Might as well build it on caffeine. We spent the next hour in a corner booth with her legal pad between us, and it stopped feeling like homework almost immediately. Her middle name was Adeline, after a grandmother on her father's side who died before Josie was born. She ordered her coffee with oat milk and too much cinnamon, which she called a personality, not a preference. She hated the ocean but loved lakes, hated horror movies but loved true crime podcasts, which she said made no logical sense, and she'd stopped trying to defend. She told me about the summer her father's construction company folded, how she'd learned to make a wedding cake for 40 people out of a recipe she found in a library book because her mother couldn't afford to hire the caterer they'd already booked for a cousin's wedding, and how something about saving that day with her own two hands had never quite let her go. I told her things too, that I hated my own middle name enough to have it legally optional on every form that allowed it, that I'd wanted to be an architect like my parents until I watched them argue over blueprints at the dinner table for 18 years and decided I wanted a career where the math simply told you whether something would stand, no opinions required, that I'd been engaged once, briefly, in my early 20s, to a woman who left 2 weeks before the wedding because she said I felt more like a well-built house than a person, safe but never surprising. Josie went quiet at that, turning her coffee cup slowly on the table. That's a horrible thing to say to someone. It wasn't wrong exactly. I built my whole life to be predictable after that, which is a strange thing to admit to the woman who just talked me into committing engagement fraud. I prefer elaborate theater with a charitable purpose. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. For what it's worth, Grant, predictable isn't the same as boring. My family's going to love you specifically because you're steady. It's the rest of us who are the chaos. We built our rules in her kitchen over a bottle of wine that Saturday, the day before the party. She had a legal pad because Josie Calloway did not do anything without documentation. Rule 1. We'd met at a mutual friend's dinner party 18 months ago, which was close enough to the truth of our actual meeting that neither of us would trip over details. Rule 2. No public displays of affection beyond hand-holding and the necessary occasional cheek kiss, because, she said, anything more would be, quote, professionally excessive. Rule 3. I was allowed to improve on the truth about my job, since apparently structural engineers sounded, in her words, suspiciously stable, and her family would ask 100 questions about my 5-year plan that I did not currently have answers for even in real life. You could just tell them the truth, I said, that I keep buildings from collapsing on people. That's a stable 5-year plan. They'll ask if we've talked about kids. We haven't talked about kids because we've known each other real time for 18 months and fake time for 4 days. Grant. She looked at me over the rim of her wine glass, and something in her voice went quiet and a little scared underneath the joke. My grandmother is 81. She has opinions about kids the way other people have opinions about sports teams. I softened. What do you want me to say? Say we're taking our time. Say it like you mean it. She looked down at the legal pad, at the list of rules that were supposed to protect us both from a lie neither of us fully understood yet. Can you do that? Look at me like you mean things. I don't know what made me say it, except that the kitchen light was low and warm, and she was close enough that I could see the freckle just under her left eye that I'd apparently been cataloging without meaning to for 18 months. I've got a face for it, I said. Engineers are excellent liars. We tell buildings they're fine all the time. She laughed, and something in her shoulders came down half an inch, and I decided right then, somewhere underneath the part of my brain that was still tracking this as a favor between neighbors, that I would do whatever it took to keep that particular sound happening. The engagement party was worse than either of us had prepared for, in the specific way that family events always exceed the imagination. Josie's mother, Deb, met us at the door with both hands pressed to her chest like she'd witnessed a miracle. Her father shook my hand twice, the second time longer, studying me the way you'd study a bridge you were about to drive across. Aunts appeared out of nowhere with trays of food and worse questions. Where did you propose? How long have you known? Does he cook, Josephine? Because your mother needs to know if you'll survive. I answered on instinct, most of it invented on the spot, filling gaps with details close enough to real life that I never once felt like I was lying, even though I absolutely was. I said we met at a dinner party through a mutual friend, that I noticed her laugh before I noticed anything else, that I proposed on a Tuesday because I didn't want to wait for a special occasion to ask for the rest of my life. Josie's eyes went a little glassy at that last part. I hadn't planned to say it. It had just arrived, true sounding, The way good lies do when you've accidentally built them out of things you actually feel. Then Trent showed up. He was tall in the particular way ex-boyfriends are always tall in these stories, the kind of tall that photographs well, and he had a laugh that carried across a room like he wanted it to. He found us by the dessert table within 20 minutes, one hand already extended toward mine before either of us had decided how this was going to go. "You must be the fiancé," he said, and something in the way he said fiancé made it sound like a job title he doubted I'd earned. "Trent, I dated Josie for 2 years. Grant." I shook his hand. He gripped harder than necessary, which is a thing men do when they've decided a conversation is actually a competition. "She's mentioned you." She hadn't. Not once. But it seemed like the kind of thing a real fiancé would say, and Trent's jaw did something satisfying when I said it. 2 years, he said again, like repetition would make the number matter more. "I know her pretty well." "Then you know she hates when people talk about her like she's not standing right here," Josie said, sliding her hand into mine with a grip that told me this was for show, and also, somehow, not entirely for show. "Trent, congratulations on Meredith and Paul, by the way. You gave a lovely toast last month at the shower." "I remember you liking it," he said, and something moved behind his eyes, some private history I wasn't part of and had no right to resent, and yet I did, immediately and completely, in a way that surprised me with its size. "I liked the open bar," Josie said flatly, and steered me away before Trent could recover a response. Once we were out of earshot, behind the drink table, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since he walked in. "Sorry," she said. "He does that. Makes everything a referendum on how much he still matters." He mentioned 2 years like it was a prison sentence he was proud of surviving. "He proposed to me at the end of it," she said, quiet now, not performing for anyone. I said no. He's never forgiven me for having a reason. I wanted to ask what the reason was. I didn't, because it wasn't my business, fake fiancé or not, and because some small selfish part of me was afraid the answer would be a version of him I couldn't compete with even in pretend. The party rolled on. I held plates. I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. I let Josie's grandmother, a small sharp woman named Ruth with a handshake like a vice grip, interrogate me about my intentions for a full 20 minutes while Josie stood beside me, physically closer than the rules technically required, her hand finding the small of my back more than once like she'd forgotten it wasn't allowed to live there. By the time we got back to the Victorian that night, we were both wrung out in the particular way that performing happiness for 6 hours will do to a person. We sat on my couch, because it was closer than climbing down to hers, and she kicked off her heels and put her feet up on my coffee table like she'd done it 100 times before. "You were good," she said. "Scary good. I told you. Engineers lie for a living." "No, I mean it." She turned her head against the couch cushion to look at me. "You made my grandmother cry a little. She thinks you're going to fix the deck at the lake house." "I could actually fix the deck at the lake house." "Don't tell her that. She'll adopt you." We sat there a while, not talking, the kind of silence that should have felt awkward between two people who'd invented an engagement 4 days ago and did not, in that moment. My hand was still resting where hers had left it on the back of the couch, close enough to hers that our fingers were nearly touching, and neither of us moved to fix that. "Thank you," she said finally. "For today? For all of it. You don't have to thank me. We had a deal." "I know. I'm thanking you anyway." She looked down at the thrift store ring still on her finger, turning it slightly in the lamplight. "It felt strange, taking it off tonight. Which is stupid, because it's been on my hand for 6 hours and it cost $14. "Keep it on," I said, before I could think better of it. "For however long this lasts. Might as well get used to the weight of it." She looked up at me, something unreadable moving across her face, and for one long second I thought she might close the distance between us, real or fake. I couldn't have told you which I wanted more. Then her phone buzzed on the coffee table, some group chat exploding with photos from the party, and the moment folded itself back up and went quiet. "I should go down," she said, standing, smoothing her dress. "Early cater tomorrow. Somebody's baby shower." "Right. Sure." At the door, she paused, hand on the frame. "This is going to sound strange," she said, "but I had a good time today. Under all the interrogation and the ambush from Trent, I had a good time with you." "Me too," I said, and meant it more than I'd expected to. That should have been the end of it. One party, one favor, one thrift store ring quietly returned to its box. Instead, it was the beginning. Meredith and Paul's engagement had apparently activated something in the Calloway family's social calendar, because within 2 weeks Josie had 3 more events on the books that required a fiancé: a cousin's baby shower, a family reunion at the lake house, and a Sunday dinner that her mother described, ominously, as just family, nothing big, which in Deb Calloway's language meant 22 people and a seating chart. The baby shower came first, in a rented event hall decorated in so much pale, yellow bunting it looked like the inside of a lemon. Josie catered it herself, technically working the event while also technically being an engaged guest, which meant I spent most of the afternoon holding trays and being introduced to relatives as the fiancé who helps, a title I decided I could live with. Her cousin Priya, 7 months pregnant and radiant in the specific, exhausted way pregnant women are radiant, cornered me by the gift table during the diaper guessing game. "So you're the one," she said, eyes narrowing with the particular delight of a woman who has decided to interrogate a stranger for sport. Josie's never brought anyone to a family thing. Not once. Not even Trent. Not until they'd been together a year. "Is that right?" I glanced across the room to where Josie was arranging a tray of miniature quiches with the focus of a surgeon, tongue caught between her teeth. "That's right. So either you're special, or you did something to make her desperate." Priya grinned, entirely unbothered by her own bluntness. "Which is it?" "I'd like to think special. Everyone would like to think that." She patted my arm with the confidence of a woman who'd clearly appointed herself the family's unofficial background checker. "Ask her about the wedding cake sometime. The one she made when she was 16. If she tells you the story, you're in further than you think." I filed that away, and that night, back at the Victorian, sitting on the front steps because it was too warm to be inside, I asked her. "Priya told me to ask about a wedding cake. When you were 16. Josie went very still, and then laughed, soft and a little embarrassed. "She wasn't supposed to tell you that." "She didn't. She just pointed me toward it like a scavenger hunt." Josie was quiet for a moment, turning her thrift store ring in the porch light. "My cousin Renee got married the summer I turned 16. 2 weeks before the wedding, the bakery that was supposed to make the cake went under. Just closed, no warning, kept the deposit. My mom didn't have the money to cover a replacement on short notice, not after Dad's business folded that spring. I found a library book on cake decorating, and I just taught myself. For layers, buttercream roses, the whole thing. In our kitchen, over 6 days, because I couldn't stand the idea of Renee not having something beautiful on the one day she was supposed to. Did it work?" It leaned a little to the left. "But yeah, it worked. People still talk about it." She looked over at me, something unguarded in her face that I hadn't seen since the parking lot. That's when I figured out food was the thing I was good at. The thing I could give people when I didn't have money or power or control over anything else falling apart around me. I could still make sure nobody went without a cake. That's not a small thing to figure out at 16. "No," she said. "It's not." She bumped her knee against mine on the step, the same gesture from the coffee shop, becoming a habit now, a small physical shorthand for something neither of us had named. "Thank you for asking instead of just filing it away as fake fiancé research." I wasn't researching. I wanted to know. She didn't say anything to that, but she didn't move her knee away either, and we sat there a long while in the warm dark, listening to the cicadas, until it got late enough that going back inside felt less like a decision and more like an inevitability neither of us was in a hurry to reach. We fell into a rhythm neither of us planned. She'd knock on my door with a coffee she'd already started making before she remembered I existed, an old habit that had simply expanded to include 2 cups instead of 1. I started leaving her crossword outside her door earlier, folded to the right page, a small ordinary kindness that had somehow become a ritual neither of us mentioned out loud. At the lake house that July, we shared a bedroom for the weekend, chastely, on opposite ends of a bed too small for two adults determined to maintain 3 feet of distance, which is a genuinely difficult architectural problem, and I would know. We stayed up late both nights talking in whispers so her cousins in the next room wouldn't hear, trading real things disguised as small talk. She told me about her father's construction business going under when she was 12, how she'd learned to cater because someone had to help pay for groceries, how food became the language she used when she didn't trust words. I told her about growing up the son of two architects who fought more than they built, how I'd gone into engineering specifically because I wanted a career defined by things that didn't fall down. That's very on the nose, she said, laughing into her pillow. You wanted stability so badly you made a career out of it. You want intimacy so badly you make a career out of feeding people, I said. We're a matched set of overcorrections. That's alarmingly accurate for 11:30 at night. She rolled onto her back, staring up at the ceiling, close enough now that her hair brushed my shoulder even with 3 feet supposedly between us. Can I tell you something I haven't told anyone in this family? Always. I almost said yes to Trent. Not because I loved him enough. Because I was so tired of being the one who held everything together that the idea of just letting someone else make the decisions for a while sounded like rest. I said no at the very last second, in the restaurant, ring box already open, because some small, stubborn part of me knew that resting and being loved weren't the same thing, and I didn't want to spend my whole life confusing them. That's not a small thing to know about yourself at 24. It cost me 2 years of my family thinking I'd ruined the best thing that ever happened to me. She turned her head against the pillow to look at me. You're the first person since then who's made me feel like I could stop holding everything together and it wouldn't just collapse. Which is a strange thing to feel about a man I hired for a weekend. I'm an engineer, I said, quiet. Things not collapsing is sort of my whole professional personality. I noticed. Her voice had gone very soft. I noticed a lot of things about you, Grant, long before the parking lot. I just never had a reason to say them out loud. I lay there in the dark, absorbing that, the particular vertigo of realizing someone had been paying attention to you the same careful, quiet way you'd been paying attention to them, for longer than either of you had admitted. She went quiet at that, and when I looked over, she was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before, careful and a little frightened, like she'd noticed something about me she hadn't meant to look for. Grant, she said, this is starting to not feel fake. I lay there in the dark, 3 feet away, close enough to hear her breathing change. I know, I said. I've known for a while. Neither of us said anything else that night. But something had shifted, the kind of shift you don't need words to confirm. And the next morning at breakfast, when her grandmother asked when we were setting a date, Josie answered before I could invent something, and there was a softness in her voice that hadn't been there at the first party. We're taking our time, she said, because it matters too much to rush. It wasn't a lie anymore. It just wasn't official either. We existed in that strange middle space for weeks, a fake engagement slowly filling up with real feeling. Neither of us brave enough to name it, because naming it meant admitting the whole architecture of the lie had been built, this whole time, on something we actually wanted. The trouble started, as trouble always does, with someone else's mouth. It was Trent, at the family reunion in August, 3 drinks deep, and looking for a way back into a conversation he'd lost the moment Josie said no to his real proposal 2 years earlier. I was refilling drinks at the cooler when I heard him talking to Josie's cousin Ashley near the dock, his voice pitched to Carrie. You really believe this is real? He said. A guy she'd known for what, a year, tops, before he's suddenly her fiancé? Come on. Josie panics when things get serious. She did it with me. She's doing it now, just in a different direction. Guy's probably just convenient. Lives downstairs. Easy. I stood there with 2 beers sweating in my hands, close enough to hear every word, and something cold moved through my chest that had nothing to do with the drinks. Not because I thought he was right, because some small, ugly, honest part of me was afraid he might be. What if I was convenient? What if this whole thing, the coffee, the crossword, the 3 feet of distance in a shared bed, was just Josie filling a role the way she filled every role in her family, competently, generously, and without ever once considering what she actually wanted underneath the performance. I didn't say anything to her that night. I should have. Instead, I went quiet in the way men go quiet when they're protecting themselves from a question they're afraid to ask, and Josie noticed, because Josie noticed everything. And by the time we were back at the Victorian, the silence between us had turned into something with weight. "What's wrong?" she said, standing in my kitchen, arms crossed the way she'd stood in that parking lot 2 months earlier. "Nothing, Grant. I heard Trent talking to Ashley," I said, and immediately regretted giving the sentence to him instead of keeping it between us, but it was too late to take back. "He said I was convenient. That you panic and grab whatever's closest when things get serious." Something flickered across her face, hurt and anger tangled together. "And you believed him?" "I don't know what I believe. I don't know what this is, Josie. We started as a favor. Somewhere in the last 2 months it turned into something I don't have a name for. And I don't know if that's because it's real, or because I'm convenient and close and easy to fold into a role you've already built." I watched the words land, watched them do exactly the damage words like that always do, and I hated myself immediately, because even as I said it, I knew it wasn't what I actually believed. I believed it because I was scared, and scared men say cruel, careful things designed to make someone else responsible for a wound they're trying to protect themselves from getting. "Convenient," she repeated, quiet and flat. "You think I've spent 2 months teaching my grandmother to love you because it's convenient. You think I lie awake some nights doing math on how many family events we have left before this has to end for real, because it's easy?" Her voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, and she looked away, blinking fast. "I don't do this, Grant. I don't let people in. I feed people because it's safer than needing them. And somewhere in the last 2 months, I stopped being careful with you. And now you're standing in your kitchen telling me I only wanted you because you were downstairs. I didn't say that's what I believe. You said it anyway." She picked her purse up off the counter, hands unsteady. "You know what the actual worst part is? Trent said something cruel, and instead of asking me, instead of trusting 2 months of real conversations over one drunk ex at a dock, you let it sit in you until it turned into a weapon." "Josie, I need to go downstairs," she said, and there was no anger left in her voice by the time she reached the door, just a tired, hollow sadness that was so much worse than anger would have been. "Take the ring off the counter when you're ready. I think we're done pretending." The door closed softly behind her, which somehow hurt more than if she'd slammed it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my apartment listening for the sounds I'd spent 18 months learning by accident. The espresso machine that didn't run at its usual 6 a.m. because it was a Sunday. The acoustic music that didn't play at 11 because, I realized with a sick drop in my stomach, she probably wasn't in a place to want music at all. I thought about the thrift store, the $14 ring, the 3 feet of distance in a bed too small to need it. The way she'd said this is starting to not feel fake, like it scared her and thrilled her in equal measure. I thought about every real thing that had been hiding inside the fake thing, and how I'd taken all of it and handed it to Trent's ugly words instead of trusting the 2 months of evidence sitting right in front of me. 2 days passed. We didn't speak. I left her crossword outside her door out of habit on the second morning and heard, through the floor that night, no acoustic music at all, just silence, which was somehow the loudest sound the building had ever made. What I didn't know until much later was that Josie had spent most of those 2 days on the phone with her best friend, Nadia, a paramedic she'd known since culinary school, pacing her kitchen with a glass of wine she wasn't actually drinking. "He said you were convenient," Nadia said, on speaker, while Josie stress-cleaned a countertop that was already clean. "That's not a small thing to accuse someone of, Joe." "I know. Do you think it's true?" "No." Josie stopped scrubbing, staring at the thrift store ring still sitting on her finger because she hadn't been able to make herself take it off, no matter how angry she was. "That's what makes it so awful. I don't think it's true at all. I think he got scared because I told him it stopped feeling fake, and instead of sitting in that fear, he found the ugliest possible reason to hand it back to me." So tell him that. I did tell him that. He didn't listen. He just kept saying, I don't know what I believe, like the last 2 months hadn't happened. Josie's voice cracked, and she pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes. I taught my grandmother to love him, Nadia. I let my mother see me happy for the first time in years. And the second it got real, the second I let myself actually want it, he flinched. People flinch when things matter, Joe. That doesn't mean it's over. It means he's an idiot who needs a minute to catch up to what you already know. I don't have a minute. Sunday dinner's in 5 days, and I am not walking into that house pretending everything's fine when I don't even know what we are anymore. Nadia was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, she said finally, in 4 months of hearing about this man, I have never once heard you sound like this. Not with Trent. Not with anyone. You're not just angry that he said something cruel. You're scared it means he doesn't want what you want. Those are different kinds of hurt, and only one of them means it's actually over. Josie didn't have an answer for that. She just sat down on her kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, and cried for the first time since her father's business closed, which was, Nadia told her later, the only reason she'd finally called Deb Calloway and quietly suggested that maybe, just maybe, somebody ought to give Grant Whitlow a nudge before Sunday. On the third day, Josie's mother called me directly, which I hadn't expected, since I wasn't sure Deb Calloway even had my number. There's a dinner Sunday, she said, without preamble. Small. Just family. Josie's not going to want you there, based on the very short, very evasive phone call I just had with my daughter, who cried during it, which she has not done since her father's business closed. I don't know what happened between you two, and it's none of my business. But I've watched my daughter feed this entire family for a decade and never once let herself be fed back until you. Whatever you did, I'd fix it before Sunday, because I don't think there's a version of this family that recovers gracefully from watching her put that ring in a drawer. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after she hung up, and then I did the only thing that made sense. I went to the thrift store on 5th Street, the same one, and I stood in front of the same case of costume jewelry. Except this time, I wasn't looking for a prop. I was looking for a way to say something true. There wasn't a ring in that case that meant anything, so I went somewhere else instead, a small jeweler 2 blocks over that Josie had once pointed out on a walk, mentioning offhand that she liked the shop window because the owner arranged the rings like little constellations. I bought one that made my bank account wince and did not care, and I spent the rest of the week rehearsing words I was terrified wouldn't be enough. Sunday came. I stood outside the Calloway family's dining room door, Deb having let me in the back with a conspiratorial nod and a hand on my arm, and I could hear Josie's voice through the wall, bright and performing for an audience the way she always did, holding the whole family up on her shoulders the way she'd been doing since she was 12 years old and learned that food was easier to offer than need. I walked in without waiting to be announced. 22 faces turned toward me. Josie's went pale, then something more complicated, hurt and hope fighting for the same space. Grant, she said carefully, what are you doing here? Fixing something, I said, and my voice shook more than I wanted it to. I said something cruel 3 days ago because I was scared, and I let a man who lost you 2 years ago plant a doubt I should have known better than to water. You are not convenient, Josie. You have never once been convenient. You are the most inconvenient, complicated, terrifying thing that has happened to my careful, stable, nothing ever falls down life. And I have been in love with you since somewhere around the crossword, if I'm honest, long before any of this started, long before you asked me to be anything to you at all. The room had gone completely silent. Ruth, at the head of the table, had both hands pressed to her mouth. I don't want to pretend anymore, I said. I don't want 3 feet of distance in a shared bed. I don't want to be your fiancé because your family needed one. I want to be your fiancé because I choose you, on purpose, with my whole stubborn engineer's brain, every single day, for real. I know I don't have the right to ask this after what I said, but I'm asking anyway, because some things are worth being brave for even when you're terrified. I got down on one knee, right there on Deb Calloway's dining room floor, in front of an audience of 22 people who had, until 3 minutes earlier, believed they were watching the ending of an engagement instead of the beginning of a real one. "Josie Calloway," I said, "will you marry me? For real this time. No rules, no legal pad, no rehearsed answers. Just you and me and whatever we build." She stood there for a long moment, hand pressed against her chest, and I watched every emotion I'd put her through in the last 3 days move across her face before it finally settled into something soft and certain. "You're an idiot," she said, voice thick. "You bought a real ring." "I did. You made my family watch this." "I did that too." "Yes," she said, and the word came out on a laugh that was half a sob. "Yes, obviously yes, you enormous, ridiculous, wonderful idiot." The dining room erupted. Ruth was already crying into her napkin. Deb had both hands pressed to her chest exactly the way she had the first day I walked into this house as a lie. I slid the ring onto Josie's finger, replacing the thrift store one that had started all of this, and when I pulled her close, she was laughing and crying at the same time, her hand fisted in my shirt the way it had been on the day she first asked me to be someone I wasn't, except now I finally got to be someone true. For the record, she whispered against my ear, "You were never convenient. You were just the first person I let feed me back." We got married the following June, in the backyard of the lake house where we'd first admitted, 3 feet apart in the dark, that this had stopped being fake. Josie catered her own wedding reception against everyone's advice and produced, somehow, the best food any of us had ever eaten, because she said she wasn't going to let anyone else be the one who fed the people she loved on the most important day of her life. I hired the same little jewelry shop to engrave the inside of both our bands with the date of that parking lot conversation, the real beginning, long before either of us admitted it was one. Ruth walked Josie down a short aisle of folding chairs and mismatched wildflowers, refusing anyone's help despite her cane, insisting that a woman who'd made it to 82 had earned the right to deliver her granddaughter to the one man in 30 years who'd made her put a ring in a drawer for exactly 3 days instead of forever. Deb cried through the entire ceremony and most of the toasts, and admitted at the reception, 3 glasses of Prosecco deep, that she'd known it was real the very first weekend, back at the engagement party, because Josie had never once looked at Trent the way she looked at me while I was busy fumbling a 4-second cheek kiss in front of the whole extended family. Priya, 8 months further along than the last time I'd seen her, and now holding an actual infant instead of a baby shower prognosis, leaned over during dinner and told me I owed her a debt of gratitude for the wedding cake scavenger hunt. "I take payment in godparent status," she said, and I told her that seemed like a reasonable rate. Nadia gave a toast that made Josie laugh so hard she had to set down her fork, something about 4 months, a legal pad, and a $14 ring that had apparently started an entire family betting pool nobody had bothered to tell either of us about. Apparently Ruth had put money on us lasting well before either of us knew what we were. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short, because I'd already said the important part on Deb Calloway's dining room floor with 22 witnesses and a ring I could barely afford. I just raised my glass and said that I'd spent my whole life building a career out of things that didn't fall down, and it had taken a woman on a staircase, out of ideas and out of patience, to teach me that the strongest structures were the ones you let someone else help hold up. Trent didn't come. Nobody missed him. We kept the thrift store ring. It sits in a small dish on our kitchen counter now, $14 of cubic zirconia, next to a real one worth considerably more. And every time I see it I think about a woman on a staircase with her forehead against her knees, asking a near stranger to save her from one uncomfortable Saturday, never once guessing she was about to hand him the rest of his life. These days, the espresso machine still runs at 6, except now it runs in my kitchen instead of hers, because somewhere in the last 2 years we stopped being an upstairs and a downstairs and just became one address. The crossword still gets left folded to the right page, except now I don't have to slide it under a door. I just hand it across the table, over coffee, to a woman who spent a decade convinced that love meant holding everyone else up and never once believed, until a $14 ring and one very public dining room confession. that someone could hold her up right back. What would you have done if your neighbor asked you to be her fake fiancé, and somewhere along the way, you forgot how to pretend? Have you ever had a lie turn out to be the truest thing that ever happened to you? Tell your story in the comments below. And if you want to be a little closer to us, we've opened memberships where you'll get shorter, exclusive stories every single week, ad-free, before anyone else sees them. If this one got you, leave a like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.